Morning everybody, and thanks for coming to listen to the update on where we're at with a significant monitoring and survey for 2016. So I'll just do a little bit of a background first about, just to get you up to speed with what's been going on and where we're at. So in the Marlborough area, marine-wise, there's a bunch of issues. We've got basically, there's a whole lot of human activity that's gone on over the last couple of 100 years, and that's been highlighted by a couple of reports by Sean Hanley, showing a big change since humans have arrived. We're certain that there's been a loss over that period, but the trouble is we don't know how much. It's not quantifiable because there's a lack of before data and a lack of data through that process. We're of the opinion that the loss is quite likely to be large. We're of the opinion that it's continuing still, and the trouble is it's hidden. A lot of the loss goes on and we don't even know it's happening. And the loss has other effects as well on other aspects of the community. So people will pick it up as the fishing's not as good as it used to be, or things like that. There's not as many birds or whatever. So there's a lot of downstream effects in terms of how it affects the environment, this loss of benthic values. And humans naturally like to blame other things, so seals and shags, commercial fishermen, everyone likes to point the finger at why it's happening. So there's a whole lot of things going on. Over my career, I started out working in estuaries, and it was pretty obvious what was going on in estuaries. The tide goes out and we can all see it, and there's a lot of, I've got pictures on the right there, hundreds of those sorts of pictures of how estuaries were treated in the past. That's sort of, now the attention has left estuaries and started to move into the marine environment. Obviously some of the key big, species like birds, mammals, turtles, things like that, were the sort of the first focus. But now the attention's moving into the sea floor and what's going on the benthos. So the council, like all councils in New Zealand, has a responsibility, and I've put it up the top there, which is all very nice, a bunch of words, but if councils don't do anything about it, it remains a bunch of words. This council is doing something about it. So in response to that requirement under the legislation, the council here commissioned the first significant area report on marine benthic values, which came out in 2011. And that was to assist the new plan, which is obviously coming out now. And the focus of that was to identify and rank what was left on the marine environment on the sea floor. And it had to be scientifically robust to stand up to it. So we put together a bunch of people, and those people have, the key thing with them is they have a lot of real world experience. They know what's out there, have worked in the marine environment for a long time, so they have a vast knowledge about what's out in the Marlborough area. As part of that process, we put together a bunch of criteria. There's no good having the experts saying we think this is important without some sort of rigorous process to define how that importance level is set. So we set up a bunch of 7 ranking criteria, which have a bunch of words with them, and that helps define why something is significant or important. So since that report came out in 2011, it identified 129 sites in the Sounds that had values. We've produced another couple of reports, one looking at a protocol for how to enter new data into the system, and one for how to collect the data. So the first survey was done the summer before the summer just gone, in 2015 it came out. We surveyed 21 sites and sub-sites. We found that 12 increased in size. That equated to about 114 hectares, and that was largely due to just more information, and we found more significant sites around the existing 12 sites. And we found that 9 declined, and that decline was quite large, 1,300 hectares, about the size of Blenheim and its suburbs. And 2 of those sites were removed completely because they'd lost their values. and that we attributed that to human activity. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we've done over the last summer. This is the second of the surveys. So what we're doing is we're looking at existing sites to improve the data level, and we're also incorporating in a monitoring component. So we're collecting from some of the sites quantitative information so that can be used as ongoing monitoring to see if there's a decline or an improvement in the sites. So it's twofold. One is survey, one is quantitative monitoring data. Now, quite a lot of the data that was used in the 2011 report was old. Some of it was anecdotal, some of it was from scientists seeing something when they were doing something else and reporting on it. So we've prioritised the sites with the least amount of knowledge. And this year we looked at from Cressel's round to Chetwood Islands and the eastern side of D'Urville Island. So just very briefly, we've picked methods that are quick and efficient. There's a whole bunch of methods that scientists can use. A lot of them are very slow and very expensive. We've picked methods that are quite rapid and we can get a lot done in a relatively short time. So we use a lot of camera and video, sonar, and we're still using divers to an extent, but we minimise that now. We've got a new device that Steve Ehrlich encouraged us to employ, which is a high definition video, and that collects still photos as well. So that's set up with lenses in a frame. So, as I say, we were looking in this top left-hand corner of the Sounds, and there's a bunch of sites out there that we investigated. So, just to summarise what we got for 2016, we collected a whole bunch of new data, video and photos from the existing sites. As a result of that data, we made modifications to the boundaries of all the sites that we looked at. We located or discovered one new site that had been reported by Rob Merritt from NIWA. So we found that, and we've also collected quantitative data from a number of the sites to allow ongoing monitoring into the future. And after this report's been produced, the next stage is it goes to the peer review panel, which is those bunch of experts, and they evaluate what we've done and make a decision on whether the recommendations out of my report will follow through to changes to the significant site. So it goes through that process of peer review before the sites get changed. So on the ground, this is the sites from the 2011 report in red. There's some quite big ones there. The map sort of makes them look small, but some of these sites are massive when you're actually out there. And as a result of the survey, we made changes to the boundaries. So if I just go back and forth a little bit. So if we just look at this side and that side, those two increased in size. And then a lot of these other sites, the boundaries were shrunk. Okay. So just to look at the increases and the decreases. So 5 of the sites and sub-sites increased in size, and that equated to 178 hectares. And that was due to an improved level of data. So we've hit the sites, and I'll talk about that a little bit more soon. We've collected more information, and we found that the sites were bigger than we initially thought. So we've just increased the boundaries. It's not because the sites have recovered, and the biggest of those increases was in the Cressel's Harbour. So there's the Cressel's Harbour site. The red dotted line is the original boundary that was based on a survey that was done in 1992, and we've found that it's actually, that habitat is bigger, so it's the green area, so we've increased it in size. So the decreases that we found from 8 sites and sub-sites, equating to 214 hectares, were again all due to redefining the boundaries and the collection of more data. And here's a good example. That was based on a survey, the red dotted line, back in 1987, I think. And we've redefined it as the green area. So, I'll just talk about the reasons for change. Last year it was largely due to human activities, so it was dredging and sedimentation, dredging, trawling, sedimentation. This year it was really due to an improved level of data. So we've upped the intensity and we've adjusted the boundaries. So just to give you a little bit of example of that, this is a site in Current Basin, which is southwest of French Pass. So this is the coast, is the bottom end of D'Urville Island. So initially there was about, each of these triangles is a drop camera image, so it's GPSed in depth. Initially that site was based on about 8 drop camera images, and the reason there was only 8 is because we were surveying the whole of the bottom end of D'Urville Island from Catherine Cove right around, so we didn't have time to intensively survey it. This time we've got time, we've peppered it with drop camera images, and as a result the green areas are where the feature is that makes it significant, so the boundaries are adjusted accordingly. Okay, so I'll just talk a little bit about how we collect the data, just as a background. So I'll just talk about the Crescelles entrance. So we had 2 sites here, a large one which was over the shallow sand habitat, and then one over a boulder bank, subtidal boulder bank. So basically we fired in a whole lot of transit lines of drop camera images. And so we tool along, drop the camera, GPS it, depth, take a photo, move on. So we cover it quite thoroughly using the drop camera, and we also collect a whole bunch of sonar tracks as well. So that operates off the boat, and produces a swath of what's on the bottom, and it looks a little bit like that. So just briefly, this is with the boat track in the middle. The sonar's looking either side of the boat, and you can see there's a rippled pattern here. That's sand with waves in it, and there's a coarse pattern here which is boulders and cobbles. So based on those 2 sets of data, the drop camera images on the sonar, we end up with coarse rippled sand in the yellow, and it looks like that. And we ended up with a subtidal boulder bank, which looks like that. And we ended up with a area of fine sand and shell, which looks like that. And then we ended up with an area of mud, which is the favourite for most people, which looks like that. So as a result, the boundary gets modified into the green area and the hatched area. So 2 sites. So that's the sort of thing we do to survey the area. It's a little bit different if we're collecting quantitative information. And I'll talk a little bit about that soon. So I'll just talk about the process now of what makes a site significant. I won't go through the criteria because it's pretty boring. I'd rather show some video and some pictures. This is the new site that was found in Crescelles Harbour. This is a rhodolith. So rhodoliths are calcified algae, which looks like that. Pass it around. So this is the Catherine Cove one, sorry. So there's 18.9 hectares in Catherine Cove of rhodoliths. This is the new one we found in Crescelles Harbour. So that's 4.6 hectares. So in the whole Marlborough area, rhodoliths equate to about 30 hectares, which is a very small part of the overall seabed in the Sounds. In New Zealand, there's more up at the top of the North Island, but in the South Island, there's some in Tasman Bay, Golden Bay, and I've never seen any, and I don't think anyone else has found any anywhere else in the South Island. So it's not particularly spectacular, I guess, compared to a 200-year-old reamer or something like that. But it's a very small area, and as you can see, it's very fragile. If you drop the book on it, it would just smash.
What's the significance of rotoliths ecologically?
Ecologically, there's been a bit of work done in Europe on them. They do provide that space inside the structure, so there's a whole lot of small animals that live in there. This is likely to be a fish grubbing around in there. That's created that disturbance. There's also a bit of work showing that some things like scallops actually will settle on to animals. Sometimes there's little hydroids that attach, and the little baby scallops will settle onto those and then hop off once they get to a slightly bigger size. So functionally it has a role to play, but just because it's actually this bugger all of it, it makes it important because there's very little of it left. And as you can imagine, it's quite sensitive to seabed disturbance. So I've got a little bit of a video. I'll just play it for a very short time just to see what it looks like. You can see a lot of little shrimps just turned off there. I don't know if you can see it from back there. Very small little animals. So there's 11-armed starfish, a bunch of hermit crabs, anemones. So it's a high percentage cover. Most of the time it's nearly 100% cover. Won't dwell on that too long. Okay, so one of the other significant sites was up in the Rangitoto Islands. This is.
Can I ask a question just before you move on about the roadless beds? You'll be aware that we did a reconsenting of a mussel farm, which I think it was Tallies at the time. We shifted it off a roadless bed.
Yes. Do
you do any monitoring to see what's happening with that bed now?
Yes, I'm going out next week to do the monitoring for that.
And yep, so you would report back at some stage, or council staff will have that information?
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so this is a different sort of habitat. We've got a whole array of biogenic habitat on the sea floor. There's two sorts. One looks like that, and one looks like that. I'll talk a little bit about that. I'll put the video on. So this is up the top end of the Rangitotos looking down. You can ignore me looking down, heading south. So the camera's just going to head down to the sea floor. I'll speed it up. It's about 36 metres deep, so it takes a while for it to get down there. So it's coming down now. So this is a three-dimensional structure, bryozoans, sponges living on a soft sediment bottom. All this is quite soft sediment, and these things are sitting on top of it. They are anything up to that sort of height, a three-dimensional structure, very fragile. So these provide habitat for a whole lot of animals, and they're also used by a lot of fish, juvenile fish as well. So that's a bryozoan mound, Salipararia. Go through a bit further. And you'll see in the background, there's a few cod staging around, but you'll see in the background in a second a very large predator swim past. Look in the background. Big kingfish. Okay. This is the other habitat type. I'll get that running. So this is a shallow ridge that runs between the two islands. It's just got a magenta lens on, that's why it looks very rose tinted. But that's to bring out the blue underwater. So this habitat is not a soft bottom. It's a cobble boulder bank that stretches between the two islands, again reasonably deep, but it's very current swept again, and there's a lot of biogenic habitat or animals that create structure for other animals. So there's a lot of jewel anemones, sponges, small bryozoans, and the like through here.
Is this a scallop area?
It's not a scallop area, it's an area that is trawled though. I know, I spoke to a fisherman at a social engagement a few years ago, and he lost a trawl door on this, there's a reef that comes out a little way on one end of this. So they do trawl over it, this bit. The other side, on the soft bottom, if they trawled over that, it would be obliterated. This is more robust because it's got that rock structure to it. So even though it would clean off a lot of the animals, because they're all quite low lying, so they've been sloughed off and then they recover again probably. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of cod following the camera around. So these habitats support a lot of fish. Alright, and the last one I'll talk a little bit about, just to give you, again, just giving examples of what these significant sites look like. This is a little channel in between, on the east side of D'Urville Island called Penguin Island. It's a small channel between D'Urville and the small island, and it's got a extremely dense dog cockle bed. This is what dog cockles, these are dead ones. This is a live dog cockle bed, so you can see the little dog cockles in there. I'll just put a bit of video on to show what that looks like. Oops. So this is quite shallow, it's only about 6 or 7 metres. Ignore me again. So there's Penguin Island. It's looking south down the east side of D'Urville Island towards Catherine Cove Peninsula, D'Urville Peninsula. So the dog cockle bed is very, very dense, almost touching each other. When the dog cockles die, they ending up as piles of shell, which you might not think is particularly exciting. But this sort of habitat here, where it's dead shell and some sand around it, is the prime habitat for juvenile blue cod. That's what they love. So it's really important for juvenile cod. And this is the densest dog cockle bed in that biogeographic area of the D'Urville Island area. And again, there's lots of fish there. So there's a row of that dead shell, which is really, really useful. I won't dwell on that too long. Okay, so there are significant sites out there. A lot of them are extremely fragile. They're often tucked around the edges, and they're very, very vulnerable to a variety of human activities. Sedimentation I've talked about in the past. Obviously, too much sediment coming down from the catchments will smother a lot of these communities, and we've changed that sort of change that's gone on. And you can see during a rain event that sediment entering the marine environment. It's all that light colour. It's quite dramatic. The other is physical disturbance, even things as benign as an anchor. And this is an anchor drag mark through a tube worm mound. Talked about last year at Pirano Shoal. This is an anchor, my anchor, going through the only protected rhodolith bed in New Zealand by accident. And you can see the sort of impact that these are light objects. And then there's big objects. This is a trawl door, and they can range from 1.5 tonnes to 3.5 tonnes. And obviously, having one of those trundle through here, we wouldn't look too good after it come through. And then there's obviously dredges as well. And they go from recreational size, which are quite light and tend to bounce around, to big heavy jobs. And in the sounds, it can be quite intense. This is Maud Island area. Each of those dots is a start and a finish point of a scallop dredge tow. So it can be extremely intense in places. So the GPS sit and mow it like a lawn. And you can imagine those sorts of communities, those rhodoliths and things like that, just cannot cope with that. So there's a little bit of data on the loss of seafloor habitats. This is in the Firth of Thames. And these were documented mussel beds on the seafloor. Look a little bit like that picture on the bottom. They were all trawled and dredged out. In the Sounds, similar things. This is Kenapuru down here. Obviously a lot of mussel beds on the seafloor. They're all gone as well. So once these things are removed, they often don't recover. And the lack of recovery is a combination of sedimentation and, again, more physical disturbance. So, with the significant sites that we've got left, and they are the remnants, we've got a choice to either protect them or lose them, really. There's a slow degradation going on, and some of the sites are disappearing. I guarantee when we go out next summer, we'll find that there'll be modifications, and some sites will have probably been damaged or lost. So we've either got the option to do nothing, or we've got the option to protect them, really. Doing nothing will mean that they'll gradually be lost to us. So at the moment we've got one protected site in the Sounds, that's Long Island Coconut Marine Reserve, that's totally protected. It's a very high level of protection, so everything is protected within there, and that represents a very small part of the Sounds, 0.12%. That's not what we're suggesting with protected areas, habitat protection areas. This is Port Stephens in Australia. They have a variety of protection mechanisms there, from total protection to habitat protection, which allows fishing still. So there's a whole suite of different types of protection for different things. Very sophisticated compared with doing nothing. So it's good. They're onto it. So we tend to have a variety of excuses why we don't do anything. And one is it'll cost money. So people will lose their livelihood. Charter boat operators won't be able to operate anymore. Tourism will go down. You name it. It's all bad for the economy if we try and protect things. And the other thing is that it influences what people can do. So I can't go there anymore and do what I want to do. So everyone has a little bit of pain through protection. So I thought I'd just quantify what would be giving up if we try and protect the habitat. So I've listed it here. So most of the significant sites are quite small when you look at the bigger picture. And obviously as we survey them, actually probably some of these boundaries are a bit ambitious that probably end up being smaller than what's shown on there. So from physical damage, most of these sites are not commercially fished anymore. They do have a go where they get as close as they can, but they risk hitting rocks and reefs. So a lot of these significant sites are tucked around structure. So they've survived because they just can't get at them, or they risk damaging gear. So there's not actually a lot of conflict there, because commercial guys are not actually often fishing these areas. And the other thing is that with habitat protection, there's a lot of fishing activities that are fine. A person using a hand line with a little sinker over a rhodolith bed is not going to destroy the rhodolith bed. So certain fishing activities are fine. Obviously, towing a recreational scallop, dredge through the rhodolith bed. You saw what my anchor did. Scallop dredge would be similar to that. So there's a lot of activities that can still go on. It's not total exclusion. With sedimentation, it's not an easy thing to fix. Obviously, that's an improvement through management, and that's a long-term project. What have we got to gain? So intrinsically, we're looking after what we've got left, and that's worth it just in itself. In terms of the physical damage, if you improve the habitat or protect that biogenic reef, you actually end up with more fish. If the Great Barrier Reef wasn't there, you wouldn't seriously expect to see all the coral fish and those things there. There's so much information on that, it's a no-brainer. So if you look after the habitat, you'll actually look after the fish. And a lot of juvenile fish rely on that sort of habitat to survive. There's been a lot of work on snapper done on that up north. Sedimentation, if you reduce sedimentation, again, those communities are looked after, you end up with more fish. And obviously that opens up other opportunities as well. If the fishing improves, for example, then tourists love it. And so people will come and visit. So it opens up other opportunities. So we've got a lot to gain. So basically, if you look after the habitat. This is a horse mussel bed. Juvenile snapper love horse mussel beds. You end up with adult snapper, more of. You take that away, the juveniles don't do so well, and you end up with less adults. It's obvious. So just in closing, so just to summarise, there is a need for protection, and it needs to happen now, and it is happening now. Without protection, they will continue to be degraded and lost. There'll be incremental loss, or in some cases, larger loss, depending on the site. We have more to gain than we have to lose from protecting the sites. And if you protect the sites, it's a simple message. You end up with more fish. If you grow apricots and you decide you don't want to buy a ladder to get your apricots and you chop the tree down to get the apricots, you're not going to have many apricots next year. It's obvious on land. It is incredibly obvious. Under the sea, we don't seem to twig to that. You take the habitat away and you take the fish away. So in New Zealand and Marlborough, we have a very poor record of protection, and that's largely due to we can't agree on anything. But if you weigh up the loss of habitat protection, a lot of people will go, well, actually, it gels with me, I want to protect the habitat, I end up with better fishing. So lots of people, if it's put to them that way, are more than happy with it. And obviously we need to continue to survey and monitor these sites to ensure that we get the boundaries right, that the information is robust enough, and we're not seeing a decline in them. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Rob. It's always interesting stuff, and pictures are worth a lot of words, aren't they? So your messages are simple but strong, and essentially it's about long-term views rather than short-term, what's in it for me. And I think that's essentially what this committee's about, and your committee too, Trevor. So I think some really good messages, and this council has invested heavily in the last few years in investigating, doing the work that you're doing, and others who will present today. And I think we should be proud of that as a committee and as a council. We've taken that view that we've got something worth protecting. So thank you very much once again, and we look forward to the next chapter.